was coming to discuss the succession procedure, which is a matter which, to his knowledge, neither him nor NCSC are involved. The chairman then adopts confess and avoid posture to discredit the mission by conceding that Kenya indeed called him, but to discuss assumption of office. We know that assumption of office is a process which is statutory, and members of that office had been appointed and are known and are not members of NSAC or persons who went to see him. Further, it could have been stated in the midst of ongoing tension that the NSAC is sending a delegation to discuss assumption of office when the whole country was waiting and tensions were rising, and in fact there was almost a breakdown at Bomas as these things were going on. The mission was led by Kennedy Kihara, who was the only person who addressed the chairman. The other members didn't speak. And the other commissioners of the other commissioners of IBC of NCSAC, Mr. Kennedy Kihara, and the mission was led by Kennedy Kihara, who was the only person who addressed the chairman, and the other commissioners of IBC. Mr. Kennedy Kihara, in his affidavit sworn on 28 February 2022, equally confirms that his whole presentation was to express the need to expedite the process of declaring the results and ensuring transparency in order to avert public anxiety. But the attitude of the chairman is exhibited by the contempt by which he treated this team. They were not met when they came. They managed to find where to wait, but they were kept waiting for 4 hours. Members of a security team in the midst of an election where tension was rising. Having led them, the chairman claims that Mr. Kihara proceeded to caution him, among others, that if Iebc declared the results with Honorable Ruto as the president-elect, chaos would erupt, and that the blood of dead Kenyans will be in their hands. But at this time, they were meeting not in the presence of Mr. Kihara and the chairman. There were all contingent of commissioners and the team from the security who comprised 4 other people. And he is trying to allege that an executive, a top executive of government, would have gone and made this declaration in the presence of all these people. This claim is, of course, denied. Mr. Kenya, as you know, is a top civil servant, is a top professional, and we all know that in civil service, discretion is the promise of valor. I mean, in fact, they're so discreet that even in normal things, they would not dare have the public know it. Curiously, the chairman reported the events which unfolded at the Tallying Center on 15th August to the police, and they filed both an OB and also made a statement. There was no mention at all of this heinous act. There's also not any mention of the visit in any of the numerous statements the chairman made. As is common in the divided house of Iebc, the chairman was supported by 2 commissioners who incidentally also went to the police and made statements, and both also filed an OB, no mention of this incident. On the other hand, the 4 dissenting commissioners have filed an affidavit dated 28th August, which confirms on behalf of herself and 3 others that the meeting indeed took place, and what was discussed was issues of security, as was indicated by Mr. Kihara. The allegations made by the chairman are extremely grave and have irretrievably sullied the conduct of the official concerned, and indeed, if proven, can constitute an offense under Section 12 of the Election Act. The court views such allegations with great gravity. It has been the position of this honorable court that where an election offense is alleged, the evidence should be clear, cogent, certain, and the proof of which the law commands to be beyond reasonable doubt. It cannot be based on allegation on one side, on a team which is known to be divided, each part supporting its position, and on allegations of the chairman without any further proof when he had had an opportunity to indicate what happened and failed to do so. In the result, it is my humble submission that the allegation made cannot fly. All the chairman is doing is sullying the character of other people to augment his claim for higher principle and integrity. And at the end of it, nothing comes out of the allegation. Indeed, after that, they proceeded, considered the results which were not ready as at the time this team was there, and announced the result he wanted to announce. Suffice is to say that this team, having met them and being satisfied that the results were being declared, made a statement to the whole country telling them to keep in peace and that all things were okay. And you will find that statement made on 16th in the affidavit of Mr. Kenywa. The next issue the Attorney General wishes to address is framed as issue number 6, and that is direction of this Honorable Court on queries whether Iebc carried out verification, tallying, and declaration of results in accordance with Article 138(3)(c) and Article 138(10) of the Constitution. It is the contention of the Attorney General that the interpretation of the said article is a matter of public interest without going to the application of the article to the dispute before you. The parties have made submissions in connection with the above matter and will not try to take your time by repeating submissions already on record. In this respect, I adopt fully the submissions by Attorney General dated 28th August 2022. The starting point, however, are the two provisions which on the face of it have no ambiguity. They are clear and unambiguous. The Commission is established under Article 88 of the Constitution. Article 250 provides its composition as consisting of at least 3 but not less more than 9 members. Article 253 establishes the composition of each of the independent commission, and Article 253 provides its incorporation. Now, there has been interpretation both by this court and by the Court of Appeal as to what Article 138 it means. And in that respect, I would like to refer you to the case of Raila versus Electoral Commission, and that is the second petition of 2007, and at page it is starts at page 153. At page 153, this Honorable Court referred to the case of Maina Kiai, and in it, it stated as follows: clearly, at paragraph 263, clearly this provision in mind, the Court of Appeal in Maina Kiai decision was categorical as it rendered itself. Thus, we are satisfied that this elaborate system, the electronic transmission of the already tabulated results from the polling station contained in the prescribed form, is a critical way of safeguarding the accuracy of the outcome of elections. I do not see how the appellant or any of its officers can vary or even purport to verify those results. Further, the Court of Appeal stated thus, and this is the important one: the appellant, as opposed to his chairperson, upon receipt of prescribed forms containing tabulated results for election of the president electronically, transmitted to it from the near 40,000 polling stations, is required to tally and verify the results. The appellant as opposed to its chairman. Later in the ruling, the court stated that it was further argued, that is paragraph 293, it was further urged in court by a number of counsel for the first and second resolution that disregarding from 34As and exclusively relying on Form 34B, many of whose authenticity would later be called into question in the tallying process, the said resolution was simply complying with the Court of Appeal in Maina Kiai. We have already held that we find later nothing in this decision to suggest that by deciding the way it did, the appellate court restrained or barred first respondent from verifying the results from the before declaring them, or that was relieving the former from statutory duty of electronically transmitting the results. What the second respondent was barred from doing by the Court of Appeal and the High Court was to vary, alter, or change the results relayed to National Tallying Center from the polling stations and constituency tallying center under the guise of verifying. So here, when they say what the second respondent was barred from doing, they are referring to the chairman. And it seems to imply that the verification ought to be done by the chairman, whereas the court also quoted with approval the finding in Maina Kiai to the extent that the appellant, as opposed to his chairperson, upon the receipt of prescribed form containing tabulated results of election of president electronically transmitted, is required to tally and verify them. The Maina Kiai decision is expressly clear on the issue, and it states at page, I think it is page 104 of our list of authorities, authority number 3, in Attorney General's Case Digest and Bundle of Authorities, page 67 to 107, it says that we hold further that reference to the appellant in sub-article 3C is not to be construed to mean the chairperson, but rather the returning officers who are mandated after counting the votes in the polling station to tally and verify the count and declare the result. The appellant, as opposed to its chairperson, upon receipt, the appellant, as opposed to its chairperson, upon receipt of prescribed form containing tabulated results of the election of president electronically transmitted to it from the near 40,000 station, is required to tally and verify the results received at the National Tallying Center without interfering with the figures and detailed process. In Article 138.10, the chairperson then declares the result of the presidential election and delivers a written notification of the result to the Chief Justice and to the incumbent president. That is now circumscribed and narrow the role of chairperson of the appellant. So it is clear from that that according to Maina Kiai, the role of the chairman was to declare the results, and the role of the Iebc was to tally and verify. And that is indeed consistent with the expectation of Article 10, our national principles and national values. So we humbly request this court to take this opportunity to clarify the position without, I think we need to emphasize, and based on what Justice Lena Ola was raising yesterday, the issue of prospectivity and retrospectivity. We're not going to that as the Office of the Attorney General. The Office of the Attorney General wants a clarification of this provision for future election and on how it impacts on other commissions. Is executive role conferred on the chairman, or the chairman is part of the commission and can only act in community with the commission? And that is consistent also with the provisions of the amendments which were done, some of the amendments which were done in 2017. You will notice that the commission has clearly delegated functions to the returning officers. Section 39(1)(a), that deals with National Assembly and County Assembly for them to tally and verify and declare. And 39(1)(b) deals with the right of the returning officers to tally, verify, and declare the governor, senator, and county women assemblies. But the provision purported to confer the right on the chairman to deal with presidential elections, and that Maina Kiai was very categorical that it was contrary to the provision of the Constitution, and this is what they said. They said that the controversial regulations 83(2) and 87(2) were not affected by amendments, and the object is not difficult to see. The High Court, having found those regulations, that's at page 105, to be inconsistent with the Constitution, it was in bad faith for the appellant to reenact them while pursuing this appeal. It is our firm position that the purpose for which Section 39(2) and 3 of the Act and Regulations 83(2) and 87(2)(c) were promulgated or made have the effect of infringing constitutional principles of transparency, impartiality, neutrality, efficiency, accuracy, and accountability. So that was the position of Maina Kiai. Maina Kiai came to this court. The appeal didn't succeed, and therefore it has impliedly been confirmed by this court. So we humbly request your lordships to take this opportunity, and my ladies, to take this opportunity to clarify that position. To go back, in conclusion, to the members of the NSAC, Lord, I would like to humbly submit that these are Kenyans of integrity, highly professional, who have pulled themselves with their bootstraps and reached the echelon of our system, and it would be very unfortunate when it is left for their name to be sullied in the midst of a political context in which they have no interest. In fact, they were merely asked by the NSAC to send a message. A spokesman was appointed who went and sent the message, but they are now being tarred with the brush of having been trying to unconstitutionally alter a process which is sacrosanct and which they have sworn by their oath to protect in assuming their position. That's my humble submission, and I will donate the 3 minutes to the court. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The 3 minutes and 16 seconds are welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. Ms. Tangatia?
Thank you, Madam President. Please first allow me to introduce the lawyers who have burned midnight hours to present so many affidavits before you. My name is Ngatia Frederick. I'm assisted by the following lawyers: Mr. Kirago Kimani, Senior Counsel; Mr. Kioko Kilukumi, Senior Counsel; Professor Kithuri Kindiki; Mr. Katwa Kigen; Dr. Muthomi Thionkulu; Dr. Linda Musumba; Professor Kivuva Kibwana; Mr. Elias Mutuma; Melissa Ngania; who I had the opportunity to present a matter in 2017 with her, Mr. Mwanza Ombati, Mr. Kipchumba Mokomen, Mr. Benson Milimo, Mr. Wilfred Nyamo Mati, Mr. Edward Mureu, Mr. Hilary Sigei, Madam Monica Nyogutu, Mr. Collins Kiprono, Wanjiko Nyaga, Emmanuel Kibet, Ian Shelela, Caroline Cherono, and Chris Ayeko. Most of them are in court number 1, following the proceedings very intently. Madam Chief Justice, I rise before you. I know it's been 2 long days. Please bear with us to oppose the petition filed by several petitioners. It is the first time in the history of this country that we now have 8 petitions. It must be a new strategy to disable the president-elect to mount a defense against 8 petitions within 4 days. But we didn't manage the impossible, and we now present our defense as follows. First and foremost, my lords, let us appreciate that these consolidated petitions arise from a presidential electoral contest. It is an electoral contest. Ideally situated, or it should ideally be resolved by electorate, the Kenyan voters, not by a court of law. But because it is also part of the constitutional structure of this country, this honorable court is granted original jurisdiction by the Constitution to resolve this contest. But in resolving this contest, it is necessary to bear in mind that all you have are affidavits filed by the contestants. The difficulty with affidavits is that one can structure fiction and peddle it as a pleading, as I'll be demonstrating. I will start with Article 38 of the Constitution, because to me that is the beginning of an understanding of this contest. Article 38 is the one that empowers a Kenyan to vote by secret ballot. And that simple sentence can be broken into 3 or into 2 parts. Voting by secret ballot, meaning it confers on the individual power to exercise a freedom of choice, unhindered by anything. Number 2, or the second part of it, the vote gives the citizen a power or a badge of dignity for self-actualization. Self-actualization in the sense that a voter is entitled to vote for a candidate of their choice. Article 38, to my understanding, therefore becomes the beginning of the understanding of the correct situation that is before this court. It is common ground, and this is important, my lords, that on 9th August, voting took place everywhere in this republic. There is not a single place that presidential election was not held. Even in Kakamega, Mombasa, presidential elections were indeed held. There is no area in this country that did not participate in that voting. Accordingly, legitimacy, I go to the next point, legitimacy of any electoral victory is predicated on the fact that voting did in fact take place. From Article 38, one then goes to Chapter 7 of the Constitution, from Articles 31, going all the way to Article 81, going to 87, which donates a power to Parliament to legislate on elections. I would immediately say this, Madam Chief Justice. The power to enact Elections Act, to my mind, relates to the 5 other tiers of elections. For the simple reason that for the presidential contest, the inquiry is defined in Article 140. The relief is defined in the same article, whereas in the other levels of elections, one could look at the Elections Act. But I'll come to that a little later. I'm doing first and foremost a broad introduction of the areas that we'll deal with. As I indicated, the scope of inquiry of a presidential contest is defined in Article 140. Before you are 8 petitions. They have mutated. Now they are 7. Oh, very well. Thank you. They have mutated to a large extent, particularly the primary petition. But my request at this early stage is this, that when you retire to consider your judgment, please carry out some surgery, see the mutations which have been added, remove them so that you are left with the original inquiry under Article 140. Why it is necessary to do so is because other things have been infused in this inquiry, like who is to be punished, who is to be castigated. Those are not matters that can be dealt with within the purview, limited purview of Article 140. As a matter of fact, when we argued Raila 1 in 2013, this apex court said a petition under Article 140 should be, I quote, concise, precise, and well-focused. Well-focused. It cannot be a meandering, never-ending saga involving other persons other than the inquiry which is specified in Article 140. As I indicated, since elections were held everywhere, that legitimacy then translates to the following. The people of Kenya did express their sovereign will. They did express that on 9th, and what is now under inquiry is whether that sovereign will by the 14 million Kenyans is to stand unhindered, or whether this court would consider any other remedy other than upholding the sovereign will of the voters. Madam Chief Justice, just barely 2 years ago, Ghana was in the same position that this court is in. They held their elections. A presidential candidate went to the Supreme Court. Identical complaints were made. Complaint number 1 ballot stuffing. Complaint number 2, votes ought to have included rejected votes, identical with the complaint before you. Complaint number 3, the chair lady was not being fair to the losing candidate. Identical things. And what is now happening in this new space is that we are all getting the drafting skills of our colleagues in other jurisdictions. Dumping and staging, we learned of it in America not too long ago. It is now before you. Ghana, 2 years ago, had identical complaints with the complaints which are before you. I pause before I go to the Ghanaian way of resolving this dispute to acknowledge my good friend, the team leader, Mr. Senior Counsel Orengo. He started by saying his case is not based on conspiracy. And he had to do that disclaimer for a good reason. It is the reason that, other than conspiracy, there is no case. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I go back to Ghana. Ghana considered all the evidence that was adduced, and the Ghanaian Supreme Court came to this conclusion, that the work of the court in a contest of this kind is to look for a substantive truth. I underline the words substantive truth of the elections. Look for the substantive truth of the elections. That's their Ghanaian approach. Then if you look at the you are able to ascertain the substantive truth of the election, then the next very important values, they call them values, is to try to get finality and stability. Substantive truth of the elections. Next layer, finality and stability. Why is there need for finality and stability? The whole purpose of these elections is actually to underscore our democracy, to have a government in place for the next 5 years, and then we'll have yet another round of seeking the voters' validation of who will form government. I emphasize the finality and stability because at the end of this contest, what will be bothering this honorable court, if I dare say so, it is what are the reliefs to be given. Elections are carried out by our good Kenyans. I said in 2013, I repeat it again, we are unable to inculcate amongst ourselves the culture of accepting the electoral result. We are just unable to do that. Maybe it is in our psyche, maybe it's in our makeup, but we are unable to do that. Because we are unable to do that, we must then come to this honorable court to try and resolve that dispute in a very unfair way, because the dispute ought to have been resolved by the electorate. In my submission, when you look at this case, devoid of lawyers' arguments, you find it is based on certain planks. Plank number 1, Form 34A was hijacked mid-air, altered, votes from one candidate, losing candidate petitioner, removed, added to the votes of respondent number 1. That is a major plank of it. The easiest way to look at it, because I do not have the ability of Mr. Mahat, who dealt with technology, is to look at it from a point of logic or the antithesis. The antithesis being this: if that is true, from a point of logic, show us one Form 34A in the public portal, because that is where ultimately it landed, which differs with the hard copy at the polling station. Show us only one. Or show us a ballot box that people from outer space came and voted into, stuffed into it, and then all this hijacking in midair took place. There's no such evidence. And why there's no such evidence is because that is the work of fiction. Work of fiction, not just conspiracy, but work of fiction. In my submission, therefore, amongst the many things this court is now being called upon to do is to find a way of moderating, I use the word moderating now in the correct sense, the excesses in the political contestants. Excesses such as imagining that this Supreme Court can now take over the role of voters and do a court coronation of any candidate. That would be a heresy. I will be dealing with the reliefs much later. I'm just doing a broad outline. And the next broad outline I would wish to do is to indicate to this Honorable Court that the orders sought in the primary petition, apart from being contradictory, would take this country to a constitutional crisis. We now have the incumbent in office with the limitations in Article 134. Limitations which are set or cast in stone by the Constitution. The incumbent in office cannot even appoint anybody to take over from any of the public officers being vilified before you. If, for example, and I say for example guardedly, this Honorable Court were to even countenance anything other than stability and finality, then a constitutional crisis would be triggered because the petitioner has repeatedly said he will not participate in an election held by Iebc under the chairmanship of Chebukati. We have adduced that evidence in the replying affidavit sworn by the first respondent. That replying affidavit is before you. It was filed on 26th August. We have attached a clip of that discussion. It's in an affidavit by Samuel Githae of the same date, 26th August, and all those are matters that are before you. Since the petitioner will not participate in a fresh election, does not want to accept defeat, then what does he offer? What is the solution he offers? The solution he offers is that there be an election presided over by the vice chair lady of Iebc. And only one needs to state that to see the crisis that this country will be engaged in. It will be a crisis of monumental nature, a crisis that I do not think that you would want to play with that kind of fire, because it will be fire upon fire. In my submission, therefore, I would request this Honorable Court, as we begin our submissions, to bear in mind how Ghana resolved an identical situation by, number one, looking for the substantive truth, and then immediately that should trigger a relief which is finality and stability. If this Honorable Court were to do that, I see a future for us. Any other solution, the crisis offered by the petitioner cannot be a crisis that this court can countenance, because your fidelity is not to anybody other than the Constitution. Since your fidelity is to the Constitution, I dare say then the reliefs that you could consider are the reliefs within the constitutional structure of this republic. With those comments, Madam Chief Justice, allow me to invite the first counsel to present, who is my good friend, Mr. Katwa Kigen. Mr. Katwa Kigen will deal with issues 1, 2, and 3.
May it please, Madam President, my ladies, may it please you, my Madam President, my ladies, my lords. My name is Katwa Kigen. I propose to deal with issue number 1, 2, and 3. And may I indicate that in dealing with those 3 issues, I'll be dealing with them together with Dr. Muthoni. My lords and my ladies, the 3 issues are to this effect. The first issue relates to the integrity of the technology, and the wording of that issue is whether the technology deployed by Iebc for the conduct of 2022 general elections met the standards of integrity, verifiability, security, transparency to guarantee accurate and verifiable results. The second issue relates to the question of whether there was interference with transmission, and it is to the effect whether there was interference with the uploading and transmission of Form 34A from the polling stations to the Iebc public portal. And the last issue that we will be dealing with Dr. Muthoni is the question of whether there are differences in Form 34A, and the wording is whether there was a difference between Form 34A uploaded to Iebc public portal and the Form 34A received at the National Tally Center and Form 34A issued to the agents at the polling stations. Now, my lords and my ladies, some of the issues that I will be discussing, or rather some of the issues we will be discussing with my learned colleague, are issues that have been discussed, but we must mention them, especially considering what the petitioner in the petition that we are dealing with, the one by Honorable Raila, states at paragraph 35 of his petition. And in that petition, I'm just reading the second sentence of that plea, where he states, the evidence shows that the acts complained of were committed by third parties, senior employees of Iebc, acting in connivance with the second respondent in order to achieve a predetermined outcome in favor of the 9th respondent, and the 9th respondent, for purposes of this petition, is the first respondent. And so we are coming from the position that we maintain and insist that there was nothing that the first respondent did that could be said to have exceeded or to have amounted to collusion with the Iebc. And I would like to start my submissions by reference to the issue of Form 34A and what the first respondent and the second respondent did. My lords and my ladies, in Maina Kia, it was determined that Form 34A is for all practical purposes cast in stone. What Form 34A contains is the last word in respect to the wishes of the voters in the given polling station. And if it has to be in any way impeached, it is only when it has been brought to court. And so in recognition of that, the first respondent, as allowed in law, availed his agents at the polling stations to participate and watch over the process of the elections. And we wish to emphasize that the place of agents is a very material part of this petition. It is going to be a very important issue in a determination of this petition, because the bulk of the evidence in respect to the issue of Form 34A in this petition is the allegation by one Arnold Ochieng, an advocate, saying that he received Form 34As which showed that the data in the Form 34A in the public portal, the data in Form 34A that the agents of the petitioners had, and the data in Form 34A that were brought by the returning officers to the National Tally Center were different. And so the question of whether or not there were agents, whether they could be trusted, and so on and so forth is important. But for purposes of the first respondent, we wish to maintain the position that he had agents, and those agents have failed to him Form 34A through his lead agent. And after the Form 34As had been filled at the polling station, and all the agents available had been invited to endorse and confirm that the data captured in the Form 34A were true and accurate. After that had been done, the first copy of the Form 34A was then transmitted to the National Tally Center, the public portal. The other one was then taken to the National Tally Center. Now, I just want to emphasize two issues in that. One is that both the parties for the petitioner and the parties for the first respondent had a chance to participate. The second thing I wish to emphasize, my lords and my ladies, is that in the entirety of the petition, none of the Form 34As at the point of the polling stations have been presented as having been challenged at any point. So that then the irresistible conclusion that should be made from the point at which the Form 34A originates is that those Form 34As represented an accurate state of affairs at the polling station, both in terms of data and in terms of the integrity of the process of voting and the counting of the votes. And as I said, then the Form 34As find their way to the National Tally Center, both in terms of transmission and the physical delivery by the returning officer. Again, agents for both parties were given a chance, and as allowed in law, the first respondent made sure that he had representation of his agents and has presented some of those agents to vindicate and verify that the data that was eventually verified at the National Tally Center were the accurate data of what happened at the polling station and passed on to the National Tally Center. I would like also to emphasize that the two things that were supposed to be done at the National Tally Center was to determine the data, and secondly, to establish the security features of the Form 34As. Having said that, my lords and my ladies, and considering that especially at issue number 3, your attention is on the propriety and the integrity of Form 34A, I must submit that the petitioners have not adduced any evidence of any challenge of any Form 34A at any point in the national tally. And this is the second chance they have, having had an initial chance at the polling stations. There is none of the Form 34As that have been challenged. It is with this state of affairs then, and as a result of this process, that eventually we have the declarations of the result coming out to indicate that the total valid votes cast were 14,213,027, being a product of a process that was interactive and where all the parties were involved. It is a product of this process also that comes out with the result that the first respondents' total votes were 7,176,141. Now, the process of verification of the Form 34As before they were transposed to Form 34C is a process that took 6 days. And over the period, all the 6 days, my lords and my ladies, as I already indicated, there was no objection to the verification of the Form 34As. It is our submission, my lords and my ladies, that the petitioner, through his agents, were happy with the process up to the last minute when the tallies were done, and it reflected a win for a party other than the one they wished. So that the reluctance and even this petition is based on objection as to who the Kenyans had wished to be their president. Having said that, then I would like to move on to the main party who has challenged the Form 34A. The witness the petitioner has brought for purposes of challenging Form 34A, being one Mr. Arnold Ochieng, and especially all the respondents have referred to him. Probably I shouldn't miss the opportunity to mention that Arnold Ochieng is an advocate. And some of the criticism we have about his affidavit and what it contains is to be looked at with the higher regard of the fact that being a lawyer, he should know more. One, my lords, he has sworn the affidavit and attached Form 34As when in his affidavit he acknowledges he was not an agent at any point. And so it brings in the point that that affidavit and what he says is hearsay. Number two, he produces about 20 Form 34As, and in all of them, he does not mention the agent who gave him. He does not say, I received. He says this Form 34A is defective because it has data that is at variance with the public portal. It is at variance with Form 34A that was brought to the National Tally Center. But he does not say at any point which of the agents gave him that Form 34A. Number three, he brings the Form 34As and says they were given to him in terms of either photocopies or photographs from the agents who were on the ground because he was not there. But he does not produce a certificate of electronic evidence to show that those agents have confirmed that indeed this Form 34A was properly generated and is capable of being treated as evidence of any property value in the consideration of your case, of this case, sorry. And lastly, my lords and my ladies, Mr. Ochieng then certifies that these Form 34As that I'm producing, having skipped, of course, certification from the point of agents, he does a certificate himself saying this Form 34As that he's presenting to court meets the criteria required by Section 106 of the Evidence Act, the electronic evidence. That certificate, my lords and my ladies, says it is a certification of a production of a video, when in fact the attachment he produces are forms, Form 34A. And so, my lords and my ladies, in considering that item number 3, the issue number 3, we pray that you take into account that the principal witness on that issue of Form 34A has adduced absolutely nothing in support of the petitioner's case. Firstly, my lords and my ladies, on our part as the first and second respondents, and similar to what the third and the fourth respondent did, was to pick the Form 34As that the petitioner had brought and said they demonstrate that the Form 34As lacked integrity. And then we went to those polling stations and asked the agents and the presiding officers in those polling stations to confirm to us what they know about the Form 34As that Arnold had brought to this court. And my lords and my ladies will see that we have attached over 6 affidavits from the agents, and each of them say each of those forms were falsified. And I'm using the words falsified to be polite about the issue. I know my colleagues have said worse than that on that issue. The third issue I wish to take up on the issue of Form 34A, the first one was the process. The second one is the evidence against the first and second respondent on that. The third issue I wish to take up about that Form 34A relates to the issue of how they were housed in the public portal and the transmission. And the first point I wish to observe and submit, my lords and my ladies, is that we pray that the court keeps the conscious awareness that the elections were not electronic elections. They were manual. The only issue that was electronic was voter registration, voter verification, voter identification, and the results transmission. And in these proceedings, our focus and attention relates to transmission. Having said that then, my lords and my ladies, we pray that the court takes in on board the point that is made in Section 39 of the Elections Act, Section 39 1F, and the decision of this court in Odinga 2013, paragraph 237. At Section 39, it is indicated that the propriety of the election process will not be defeated by reason of results transmission. And in the Odinga 2013, the court said that it takes judicial notice that it is possible that technology can fail and our elections will not be held captive to the likelihood and the risks that relate to technology. Now, my lords, we would like them to submit to this effect, that assuming for argument's sake, it is true that there were any deficiencies or any defects in the process of the transmission of the results, it is our submission that that did not impeach the elections, because eventually the election and the results were declared based on the hard copies that were brought by the returning officers from the constituencies. They were not based on the portal, that the portal is meant for comfort, for transparency, for accountability. It is not meant to represent the accurate and the true results. It is the hard copy that is taken to the National Tally Center for purposes of verification in terms of data and for security features. Two last issues on that issue, my lords and my ladies. The first one, my lords and my ladies, is we pray that in reflecting on this issue of Form 34As and the alleged discrepancies and improprieties, you do note that the petitioners do not point out the variances that they are alleging exist. But most importantly, they do not come up with their own tally. They are saying the results that I just read a few minutes ago, that is 14,213,027 being the total valid votes cast, and the 7,176,141 in favor of the first respondent are inaccurate. They say that. However, they do not come forward and say this is the correct tally and it is based on what. And we pray that you take that on board in considering that issue. With that, my lords and my ladies, I submit that the petitioners have failed to discharge their burden of proof, which is above balance of probabilities, to demonstrate that indeed there was any deficiency or defect in Form 34A or in their transmission, and I adopt the submissions made by my colleagues, especially for Iebc. The second issue I wish to address, my lords and my ladies, is related to the same issue of transmission, being the alleged logs that third parties are said to have used to interfere, and in the words of the petitioner, to stage, to dump the Form 34S. And my lords and my ladies will notice that in support of this contention, the petitioners are relying primarily on two affidavits, one by John Kidongo and the other one by Benson Wesonga. And the chain of events is to this effect. John Kidongo swears an affidavit that he sat in some discreet place. He says somewhere in Karen. I don't know what he has against Karen. He says he sat somewhere in Karen with someone whose identity he doesn't disclose, and he was told that some log particulars were used to interfere with the results. Then we have the Nwesonga step in and purport to analyze those logs and say, indeed, his observation as an expert in IT is that those logs were used to interfere with the results. And we would like to observe a couple of things. The first one, my lords, as already submitted by my colleagues in the Iebc, for the Iebc, is that evidence from Kidongo is a third level hearsay. It is based on information given to somebody who is not disclosed, and Kidongo is the third person in that order. By the time Benson Wesonga is purporting to do analysis, he is at fourth level of hearsay. But more interestingly, my lords, we took time to look at the logs, and what struck us was that one of the logs which had been manipulated, one of the logs escaped their attention, and it has a date 2017. I know my learned friend Mahat already explained how in the 2017 polling stations were used as part of those, possibly the matrix of the logs. On our part, we noticed the date 2017, and it piqued our interest. When we checked, my lord, we realized that indeed the particulars of those logs, or substantial parts of those logs, were parts of logs that had been posted by his friend, Professor Makau Mutua, in 2017. And they had just been lifted and purported to be the logs that had been used in 2022. In response, and without being technical, we put in an affidavit saying, these logs were the one tweeted in 2017, these logs were the one used in the petition in 2017. And what then Mark Kidongo did was to make a fast retreat and saw an affidavit saying, I am retracting what I said, I am retracting the allegations that those were the logs that were used. Now, unlike the first affidavit where he had said he had been given those logs by somebody else, he now comes and disowns those logs personally. He does not say, I have gone back to the shadowy person that I had used, and he has told me that I'm mistaken. He now takes responsibility for it and says they are wrong. But he not only says that and just leaves it there, he says, by the way, please understand me, they were meant for demo. He says that I had indicated them and they were meant for them. And you look at that, you'll see that in his affidavit of the 28th August 2022. Now, my lords, more importantly for our petition, more importantly for our response to the petition, is that those are the only logs that had been presented for purposes, in terms of logs, those were the only logs that had been presented for purposes of challenging this petition, these elections. With Githongo's withdrawal of those logs, my lords and my ladies, we would have expected that then that element of the petition would not be given to you. You would not need to consider them again because they have been withdrawn. What happens then? One Justice Nyangaya walks in as a respondent and introduces new set of logs. He jumps into those ones and now analyzes them and again says they demonstrate and indicate that there was interference with the transmission and the public portal. My lords, as my senior counsel Ngati had indicated, we have a scenario where the petitioners were able to have friends in the part of the case of the respondents. And then we have the situation where Nyangaya as a respondent now makes a new petition, my lords. And we would like that to be an issue for your consideration. Whether you will look at the new logs that have been introduced by Nyangaya in the cause and purport that he is a respondent when in fact he is an extension and a surrogate extension of the petition. We submit, my lords, that, and my ladies, that you should reject the attempt to have introduced a new petition, one, and number two, a petition that was filed out of time, and number three, that has been innovatively done by the petitioners to extend their case. We pray that you do find that the issues of the logs are dead and they are not available for your consideration. As my learned friend Mr. Mhat said, and Abdikadir said, we would pray, and Mr. Gumba also said, we would pray that you apply your minds to the scenario where parties come and present to you petitions purporting them to be well-founded when in fact they are based on falsehoods, my lords. And my lords, we challenge you to exercise your capacity to be annoyed at this kind of a conduct. Lastly, my lords and my ladies, I have been instructed to also say something about the arguments made by my friend Omutata in petition number 7, in which he argues that the data shows that indeed none of the contestants achieved more than 50+1. And I just want to say three things, my lords and my ladies. Number one is that Omutata, in paragraph 14 of his petition says the 65.4% that he's using was picked on the 9th of August 2022. My lords, as Maha had already explained, that figure kept changing, as by close of day on the 9th of August, it had changed to 64.6, and by close of all the data, it was 64.7. My lords, he used a percentage that was not static but was moving. The second thing, my lords, is that he used the wrong denominator. He calculated his data using the total registered voters as opposed to total registered voters in respect to the KIMs that had reported their data. And I think Mr. Mahat already explained that very well. And for all those reasons, my Lord, we pray that you do not come to any temptation that indeed the 9th respondent did not achieve 50+1, but indeed to adopt the calculations as done by Iebc. Thank you very much, my lords. I pray and request to cede ground to my friend, Dr. Thiongolo.
My lady and my lords, my name is Mudomi Thiankolu. My senior started addressing you on the fictional aspects of the case before you, and I'll focus on showing you why it is fiction. And in the literature and the arts, they talk of several genres. When we thought about this matter, we thought the fiction before you is of the genre called tragic comedy. That is a combination of comedy and tragedy. In terms of tragedy, we thought of Macbeth, and we thought of Macbeth talking about the demise of Lady Macbeth and the frustrations of life, and saying it is a story full of sound and fury which signifies nothing. I will tell you shortly why this petition before you is a work of fiction, and specifically a story full of sound and fury, what my colleagues have called shock and awe, but which signifies nothing. We thought of the comical bit of this case, that we have to engage this eminent court to hear spurious allegations. And the comedy we thought about is called Much Ado About Nothing. And we'll be hoping to persuade you that the case before you is not only full of sound and fury but signifying nothing, but is much ado about nothing. Lastly, we came closer home and thought of a work of fiction in the realm of comedy and tragedy by a son of East Africa called Shaban Roberts. That work is called Kusadikika. And many of you, my lords and ladies who have read it, you will find it is a work in which people are invited to believe every allegation, however spurious, however preposterous. And we suggest to you that maybe the petitioner himself is taking you to be that country called Kusadikika by Shaban Roberts, in which if you're told the sun rises in the north, you don't apply your mind. Your challenge, my lady and my lords, is who do you believe amongst all these people with stories and counter stories? Is it the man whose name combines the names of two saints, John and Mark, and the third name, Githongo, who was head of ethics in this country, but has the audacity to produce before you forged logs? And when he is called out, instead of profusely apologizing, he says you yet another affidavit full of ifs and buts. Is it Arnold Ochieng Oginga, advocate of the High Court of Kenya, a learned man, to be fair, but who produced to you documents that were disowned by all the presiding officers, and documents he hasn't told you where he has found them, and which my classmate, Mr. Mahat, was able to show you have actually been doctored to fit into the narrative of the fiction? Or, my lord, are you going to believe Githongo when he tells you that the undisclosed man was demonstrating to him a Form 34A for governor, even though we all know the results for governor are not streamed on the public portal? Or, my lord, are we going to believe the 4 commissioners, who we all saw day and night for 6 days and 6 nights. I use the word deliberately, my lady, because we never left our TV screens. 6 days, 6 nights. We saw them announcing results that had been verified, and you were told by Mr. Mahat, indeed, they announced most of them. But when the winner becomes apparent, they suddenly turn around and tell you Mr. Chebukati is a bad man, he should be crucified. Are those the people we are going to believe, my ladies and my lords? Or are we going to believe the petitioner himself when he tells you in his petition and affidavit that the Honorable William Ruto intercepted, altered, staged, and then dumped Form 34A on the e-portal? My lady, why we thought this was the most elementary attempt at the fiction, if you do your math, what the petitioner was telling you is that the Honorable William Ruto was intercepting and changing on average 23 Forms 34A per second in the span of 8 minutes that he claims we staged, dumped, and altered over 11,000 Forms 34A. A question was asked yesterday, my lady. How do you and when do you change a Form 34A? And I will invite you to note from the structure of that form that most of the data comes pre-printed. The name of the polling station is pre-printed, the serial number. So the only things you would alter on that form are actually the things written by hand, either by the presiding officer or by the agents or the deputy presiding officer. 3 clusters of people. In the event there are 4 agents, we are talking handwritings of about 7 people. And you're being told the Honorable William Ruto had the capacity to intercept these forms, 11,000 of them in 8 minutes, and alter them. It is in the realm of fiction. And I suggest perhaps politicians should stick to politics and leave fiction to artists. Or are you going to believe, my lady, when you're told that the Honorable William Ruto had this young man with a laptop at the National Tallying Center, and that this is the laptop he was using to do these things called dumping, staging, and whatever not? I think we may have our own views about various citizens, my lady and my lords, but I am struggling to understand who is this fraudster that would walk to a laptop not in some remote place, some inaccessible place where all he has is the network, but he would go to the National Tallying Center with a laptop, and the only reason he has that laptop is to intercept results in the full glare of our TV cameras, in the full glare of all those security men and women that are in that tallying center, under the eagle eye of all the agents. It is simply spurious. My Lord, you are told all these things, and I'm sorry if this is repetitive. The least we would expect is you to be shown a Form 34A that was altered, and not the ones they have cooked as a work of fiction. The least we expected is for them to tell you which are the polling stations in which this interception, staging, and dumping occurred. In short, my duty, my lady and my lords, is to tell you, even if you are to look at this case with your most magnanimous and generous set of eyes, even if you are to be as benevolent as Father Christmas, the verdict you would return is that this case before you is a story full of sound and fury, but which signifies nothing. The case before you is much ado about nothing, and you must tell the petitioner, this is not the Supreme Court of the Republic of Kusadikika. It is the Supreme Court of the Republic of Kenya. It is to be expected that when you move this solemn court, you don't put us in exercises that leave other civilizations wondering why we have to waste the time of the Supreme Court, or God forbid, even the small claims court, dealing with allegations of the type before you, which cannot be believed even by the most gullible person. Let the works of fiction be left to Hale Grissom, James Adliches, James Bond. This is a solemn platform. I regret and I pity all of us that we came to deal with such a spurious matter. Thank you very much. I see the ground now, my lady, to my learned friend, Melissa Ngania. She'll take over on issue number 4 and 5.
Thank you, Honorable the Chief Justice, the judges of the Supreme Court. For purposes of record, my name is Melissa Ngania. I'm going to address the court basically on issue number 4 and 5 as framed by the court. The cornerstone and the grievance of the petitioners in regards to the two issues, number 4 and 5, is the question of the postponement of the gubernatorial elections, as well as the variance of votes within the elective positions. As to the mathematicals, the custodian of the numbers has demonstrated before this court this morning that there is actually no variance, and whatever variance could be explained. But more importantly, Honorable Chief Justice and the judges of the Supreme Court, what is the grievance against our client? That is William Samoei Ruto and Honorable Rigathi Gachagua. I would pick the choice of words as pleaded by the petitioners for obvious reasons. This is an election petition, a presidential election petition that has the crust of proving its standard to the required well laid down principles in law. Now, this is what one Celestine Anyango tells us. She tells us that the grievance against my client is that a pattern throughout the country where the 9 respondents appears to benefit from a fraudulent paddling of votes in violation of the law. They are not sure of that. They've not laid credible, tangent evidence as to the paddling of that votes to the benefit of our clients in this respect to warrant this court to annul the elections as conducted. But what is more disturbing is the position of the Kenyan voter. As laid down by my senior counsel, Fred Ngatia, that is to be found under Article 38 of the Constitution. But more importantly, we have a history as a country. We are a country that has been privileged to legislate on each and every issue that has been litigated before these courts. We are a country that even legislates on the time between which a president should be sworn in office, for obvious reasons, because of the history that has culminated around our electoral law jurisprudence. Now, the appreciation of the cornerstone of Article 38 then would seek refuge in the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission. This court, in the famous BBI case, categorically stated the history behind our constitutional making process. I'll not wish to regurgitate the same, but I'll beg the court, when you retire to write your judgment, to adopt your paragraphs of that decision, paragraph 415 to 441 in that respect. Again, Honorable Chief Justice and members of the Supreme Court, judges of the Supreme Court, then what culminated to the Article 38 of the Constitution? In the final review, for us to get the gist of the Kenyan voter, because all that we are trying to help this court to realize is that what was the will of the Kenyan voter as expressed in Form 34A. And the Kenyan voters said what they wanted, and that is to be found under page 51 to 52 of that report. Now, coming to my submissions on Article 38 in that respect, their views were finally codified in our Constitution under Article 38 in that respect. For purposes of emphasis and so that we do not lose the trajectory of the Kenyan voter, this is what Article 38, Clause 3 says. Every adult citizen has the right without unreasonable restrictions. That is the underlying word. The Kenyan voter wants to vote without unreasonable restrictions, to vote by secret ballot in any election or referendum. What we've been told is that there has been the restrictions of postponement of gubernatorial elections. There have been the restrictions of what happened in Bomas. A Kenyan voter is not interested in that. They want their vote to be traced and traced with the precision that is required. How then do you trace the vote in that respect? Form 34A becomes crystal clear. The petitioners have not challenged Form 34A in that respect, so that the votes that were cast and tabulated in that respect remain unchallenged. And where they have challenged, we have demonstrated before this court that it is unfounded, it is based on generalization, and it is based on conjecture. It cannot stand the test of what a Kenyan voter would want. More importantly also, Honorable Chief Justice and members of the Supreme Court, is that how then do you establish other polling stations? Because the problem that we are having is that there are no agents who have demonstrated any problem with the voting at the polling station. Regulation 81 of the Election General Regulations provide what should happen after the voting has been conducted. That is, the valid votes to be put together, the rejected votes, unused ballots, and counterfeits. They are to be preserved for an election court. Nowhere have we been told that none of that happened, or that there was a problem with whatever happened at the polling stations. Honorable Chief Justice and judges of the Supreme Court, Justice Njoki Nugu in 2017, in her dissenting opinion, had this to say, that agents are very important part of the electoral process. These are the agents of the different presidential candidates. Now, if they are not present to certify their role, they should then not blame any other person in that respect. We have established with our agents and filed the affidavits in that regard that indeed the Form 34As were issued to us, and it reflects what Iebc posted in the portal. The petitioners have not discharged that burden. They cannot now come back and say that they would want to challenge an election by failing to do that which they are required in law to do. What has happened? We've been told a lot of stories. We have 8 petitions all trying to explain a lot of things. In my concluding remarks, I'll seek refuge in the Holy Book. In Proverbs 10:19, it tells us this: when words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. They've had to use 8 petitions to say what they want to say. In those abundant words, then sin cannot be lost in that respect. It will be my humble prayer that the petitions before this honorable court be dismissed. I'll take this opportunity to welcome my learned senior, Professor Kithure Kindiki, to address you on the 6th issue. I'm most obliged.
May it please you, Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, judges of the Supreme Court. My name is Kithure Kindiki for the first respondent. On 15th August 2022, a mob of people, including people holding senior positions as state officers, invaded the dais at the National Tallying Center of the presidential election at the Bomas of Kenya. In what I regard as a very, very orchestrated and clear attempt to interfere with the powers of the Iebc to declare the presidential results following the verification and tallying of those results. As a result, chaos erupted. Several Iebc commissioners, staff, and other people who were lawfully at the tallying center were seriously injured. To date, nobody has been asked even to write a statement on what happened on that day. Today, no investigations whatsoever have been made by the agencies of state which should be doing this. And to date, this heinous and frontal attack on our democracy remains unresolved, and the perpetrators are marauding around the country, and some of them are in this courtroom. Chief Justice, judges of the Supreme Court, the events on that fateful day mirror what, in our respectful view, took place on January 6, 2021, when a rowdy gang of violent protesters laid siege on Capitol building in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America, following the spectacular defeat of Donald Trump as president of that country in the 2020 election. The chronology of events of that day, the day our country was shamed in the eyes and in the presence of diplomats from all over the world, local and international press. The events are detailed in the affidavit of Mr. Wafula Chebukati, a gallant son of Kenya. That affidavit is before this court and is dated 26th August 2022, particularly paragraphs 58 to 75. This has been corroborated, my lords, my ladies, by the affidavit of Professor Abdi Gulie and Boya Mulu, the affidavit of Boya Mulu, both of which are before this court, and the relevant parts are paragraph 17 to 37 and paragraphs 9 to 10, respectively. We respectively submit that the aforesaid activities at the National Tallying Center on 15th of August 2022, regrettably perpetuated by emissaries, agents, supporters, and sympathizers of the first petitioner, who is now before this court seeking redress. Those events and those activities amount to nothing short of a flagrant attempt to overthrow the Constitution of our country, to subvert the sovereign will of the people of Kenya, contrary to Article 1 of the Constitution. It is our view that those events alone constitute nothing but an attempt to establish a government unconstitutionally, contrary to Article 3.2 of the Constitution. And in our humble and respectful view, Chief Justice, my lords, my ladies, the events of that day are basically an attempted but failed coup d'etat. Unfortunately, the jurisdiction of this court under Article 140 does not allow it to punish these egregious acts of treason, but these events must inform the context in which the main petition and its offshoots ought to be adjudged. Curiously, the Vice Chief of Defense Forces, Head of Police, Head of Intelligence, the Head of Public Service and Chief of Staff, which itself is an illegal position under our Constitution, all those people have not denied that they met the Iebc in plenary. The only thing they have told this court is that they went there to try and fast-track the declaration of results and not to do what Mr. Chebukati has told this court on oath, which is they went to go and try to have the first petitioner declared as president of the Republic, or otherwise force a runoff between him and my client. With tremendous respect, we ask this court to consider those acts as not only destructive to the independence of our institutions, but more particularly an affront on Article 249, 2A of the Constitution that describes the IEBC and other such independent institutions in the following words, that they are independent, and I quote, and are not subject to direction or control of any person or authority. That includes, in our humble view, positive and negative interference, even if, for argument's sake, which is denied, those heads of very sensitive institutions walked into a plenary of the IBC to fast-track the declaration of result. Even that in itself is illegal and unconstitutional. What are the principles upon which the context we have laid should be adjudicated? Chief Justice, members of the Supreme Court, it is the submission of the first respondent that there are at least three immutable principles that run across most Commonwealth jurisdictions upon which this petition and its offshoots should be adjudged. One is the principle that no election shall be questioned or declared void because of errors, informalities, irregularities, or illegalities that have little or no bearing to the process and the result. This principle, Chief Justice, judges of the Supreme Court, this principle has endured for more than 150 years and was first initiated in the United Kingdom Ballot Act of 1872, Section 13. 2, that the burden of proof in election petitions lies on the person who seeks judicial invalidation of the election, not on the respondents. This principle has been cited in one of the authorities we have relied in and already highlighted by learned senior counsel Fred Ngatia, the case of John Mahama versus the Electoral Commission of the Republic of Ghana, 2021. Principle number 3, and this is specific to Kenya and the minor KI decision. The polling station is the true locus for the free exercise of the voter's will, and I'm shocked to see the petitioner and the latest pseudo petitioner, because when I listened to the Attorney General with due respect, I clearly thought that we are listening to another petition, especially on the issue of Article 138.3c, despite the assurances that he was not opposed to any petition, and I think he fell short of saying he's supporting the petitions. What are the specific principles in the interest of time? The first one, the 3 are the general principles. What are the specific principles? 1, and what I intend to demonstrate with these specific principles and the general principles is that the answer to the question on the issue number 5 is in the affirmative. That yes, the IEBC carried out verification, tallying, declaration of results in compliance with 138.3c and 138.10. These are the reasons. Number 1, the verification and tallying happened and was done by the chairperson, commissioners of IEBC, and the staff at the National Tallying Center in the presence of the candidates of the agents of the presidential candidates. And this is in the affidavit of William Ruto, paragraphs in support or in opposition of the petition, paragraphs 18 to 20, and the affidavits of Veronica Nduati, paragraphs 7 to 14. Number 2, the IEBC complied because an interpretation to the effect that Article 138.3c refers to the 7 commissioners, or a majority of them, is inaccurate and pedantic for this reason, that the Constitution and the Elections Act attributes to the Commission certain acts that are eventually done not by commissioners, but by both the permanent and temporary staff of the IEBC at the polling station, at the constituency returning the constituency tallying center and county tallying center, and I dare say even at the national tallying center. And that explains why, for example, the Constitution in Article 86.5 and 86
B and 86C talks about the commission, but the work eventually is done by returning officers and in the first instance by the presiding officers. C, B, and C of Article 86 of the Constitution, which is not speaking about the National Assembly election or any other election, but the presidential election. The actions of returning officers, presiding officers, are deemed to have been done by the commission, and that explains our argument. Number 3, an interpretation to the effect that Article 138(3)(c) refers to the 7 commissioners would lead to an absurdity in interpretation, because it is not humanly possible for the 7 men and women who are commissioners, however important they think they are, it is not humanly possible for them to tally results emanating from 46,229 polling stations across the country at the moment. Number 4, verification, tallying, and declaration was done because the right to franchise, Chief Justice, judges of the Supreme Court, this right in Article 38 of the Constitution cannot be subjected to the will, to the veto, or even to the ego of 7 men and 7 women. Even if, as they claim, they think they hold the constitutional veto to try and moderate or alter or balance the will of the people as expressed at the polling station and as received in original 39As. Number 5, verification, tallying, and declaration was done, even, I dare say, Chief Justice, judges of the Supreme Court, even for the 27 constituency results that were not verbalized. They were not announced verbally, but they were declared because they were posted in the website after chaos broke out at the National Tallying Center. I want to invite the court to consider, in interpreting whether what has been pleaded before this court in terms of what the commission did after that risk on life and limb happened. I want to plead and persuade this court to invoke, by way of analogy, 3 doctrines of law. The first one is the doctrine of frustration in the law of contract, where there are contractual obligations to be performed, but the contract is frustrated. Number 2, the doctrine of necessity in international law. And thirdly and finally, the doctrine of supervening impossibility, where there are legal obligations, but the party on whose those obligations accrue cannot perform them as a result of supervening impossibility. Chief Justice, my lords, my ladies, number 6, the Iebc verified and tallied and declared all the results because none of the 46,229 from 34As have been impeached. Number 7, the Iebc verified, tallied, and declared all the results because the tallying that happens at the National Tallying Center is basically clerical. And I think the commissioner should know none of them, including the chairman, has any role whatsoever that is significant other than just recording the clerical and arithmetical issues. And this is so, and this explains why, even when there are discrepancies between what was transmitted through electronic means and what comes as a physical form, the best that the chairperson, as the returning officer, can do is to note the errors in the error form, and only this court can actually interrogate and decide on the fate of those discrepancies. Number 8, verification, tallying, and declaration was done pursuant to 138(3)(c) and 138(10) because an interpretation in the opposite direction would lead to a constitutional crisis where commissioners who think they have a role to veto and moderate the expression of the will of the people of Kenya in the vote can decide to form factions and have their own candidates, declare their own results, which they have verified in quote and tallied in quotes. Finally, Section 10, 11, and 11A of the Elections Act envisage the commission to include the secretariats and staff, and therefore verification was done according to the affidavit of William Ruto, the affidavit of Veronica Duarte. The tallying was done in the presence of agents at the National Tallying Center. With tremendous respect, I would like to conclude by submitting that this court should find that a petitioner whose agents and supporters are engaged in a kind of behavior that is now of public notoriety, and I invite the court, over and above what is pleaded, to take judicial notice of of the events of that day. A petitioner whose supporters, sympathizers, and agents engaged in those kind of things should not be anywhere near the hallowed ground of a Supreme Court of the Republic of Kenya, trying to seek relief, among them a relief under Section 80A, that they be declared winners of an election that they didn't win. We submit that the mob that swelled our image, the image of our nation, including the conductors of the orchestra, are now before this court shouting loudest that we must release Barabbas. This court should stop Barabbas and his mob from benefiting from their own malfeasance. We pray that all the petitions, including the submissions by the Attorney General, particularly on this issue of Article 138, those petitions be struck out with costs. I respectfully and humbly submit. And now, with the permission of the Chief Justice and the court, I yield the microphone to Senior Counsel Kirago Kimani to address the court and submit on issue number 7 and number 8. I thank you.
May it please the court, I will not, my name is Kirago Kimani, I will not address you on issue number 7. I believe it's been adequately dealt with by the Iebc and its chairman. I will address you on only issue number 8, and I will try and avoid rehashing what the Iebc and its chairman addressed you, in my humble view, very effectively. This is simply looking at the test that has to be met by the petitioners in order to determine whether the election should be nullified. And you've settled this as far back as 2013 in Raila petition number 1, or it was petition number 5 actually, but it was the first election petition under the new constitutional dispensation, and repeated this in 2017. The long and short of it is that the question you must ask is whether it has been demonstrated that the election was conducted so badly that it was not substantially in accordance with the law relating to elections, in this case the Elections Act and Articles 81 and 86. The burden is squarely on the petitioners to demonstrate indeed this is the case. The word used by Section 83 is magnitude, of such magnitude, really. It is not enough to demonstrate there were irregularities. It is not enough to show that there was a breach of the law. But It has to go beyond that to show that it affected the outcome. Has that been done? I'm not going to take you through the multiple allegations of irregularities and breaches of the law, but I've tried to look at these petitions, the 7 surviving ones, and I think there are approximately 46 allegations of breaches of the law and irregularities. This is a classic case of throwing everything other than the kitchen sink at your opponent. There are a lot of overlaps, but by and large, everything that could be said has been said. And I'll come back to this. The kitchen sink did show up a little later. But I don't want to walk you through all of these allegations. Let's just look at a few of these. It's alleged that there has been an infiltration of the Iebc system. I'm not going to rehash what Mr. Mahatomane so well explained to you. But I think these petitions are an invitation to this court to lay down the law. It's one of your jobs. That it's not enough to show up here and throw things out there and say, we hope some of it will stick. No. People must be held to account. They must be told, show us where the evidence is. And indeed, this is what Rule 9 of the Supreme Court presidential election rules requires, that when a petitioner presents a petition, they will also furnish evidence. Has that been done in my humble submission? No. This evidence of infiltration, in the first instance, was put in various affidavits. John Mark Githongo, you've been told about how he recanted this. There were allegations in various other affidavits. And what happened then? There was a robust response from the referee, the Iebc, and the first respondent. And then what do we have? We have a second burst of alleged evidence in the nature of an affidavit by George Njoroge. And we are not even, we did want to start playing games by saying this evidence should have come at the start, as the rules require. So this case keeps being panel beaten as we move along. And it's not just petition number 5 where this happens. It has happened in another petition where you were addressed about 291 constituencies and not 290. I believe there was a question from a judge directed at this, because there's a short answer to that, but the question was not directed at me. But that wasn't even pleaded. So what we have is a situation where you keep being told new things as we move along. There's another allegation that the Iebc was so dysfunctional that you couldn't possibly have an election that complies with the dictates of Article 86. And we are told that this started even before. Now the question is, why wasn't a challenge made to the mandate or to this institution before the elections? An Article 140 petition is very narrow. It concerns the results and nothing more. This petition has been turned, or these petitions, by many of the petitions, has been converted into an attack on the on the chairman or the chairperson of the Iebc. It's not the function of the court to look at the conduct of the chairperson with a view to taking action. You were addressed in great detail as to why or how he has affected the last 2-3 elections. So what were we waiting for when Article 251 tells us what to do? The Leadership and the Integrity Act tells us what to do. Let me very quickly, without going into any more of these 46 alleged irregularities and breaches of the law. Just try and illustrate just how bad these petitions are, or how lacking in substance they are. And I will, Mr. Mahatsomane, my land friend, Mr. Mahatsomane, has spoken to this, but I want to illustrate by showing you just a little bit about what was contained in the affidavit of Arnold Odinga, Ochieng Odinga. And if I could just, if it could be put up, I want us to look at what has been presented before this court. And it's quite easy to come to this court and say, listen, somewhere between the people expressing their will and the declaration of the results, there's been some tampering. Let's look at what they say. Paragraphs 81 to 91 of the affidavit of Arnold Ochieng Odinga says that there was willful, deliberate, and criminal tampering of certain results, and they've identified 41 forms. What I suspect they did not expect to happen is that the Iebc would respond to just about each and every one of these forms. Let's look at just one sample. And before we do that, what are we trying to achieve? We'll look at a Form 34A from the Iebc portal. We will look at Form 34A delivered by Iebc to the court. We will look at an affidavit from a presiding officer, and we'll look at an affidavit from an Azimio agent, and we'll look at a Form 34A provided by a UDA agent. The affidavit of the Iebc presiding officer is not part of the slides, but we will be able to compare these documents. If we could skip this next slide so that we move quickly. Let's skip that slide, please. Now the question is where the petitioner's fraudulent 34, where allegedly fraudulent 34A came from, and I'll return to that at the end. Let's just look at Kibagare polling station. The next slide, please. If you look at the signatures, one of the signatures is an ODM agent, Mr. Eric Atuma. Now the petitioner in petition number 5 has filed many affidavits in response to the respondents, including the first respondent. They have not responded to this. They have not challenged this, but they put it out there as an illustration of what games were played either by the referee or in concert with the first respondent. So the first thing you note is the signatures of the two agents. The next thing I'd invite you to look at is what the votes were according to the Iebc portal. And Malan from Mahatsomane invited you. The portal is up and running. Check this. What was the total of votes cast, or what was for the two candidates in Kibagare polling station, stream 2 of 7? Raila Amolo Odinga, 244. Mr. William Samoei Ruto, 114. Let's go to the next slide. If you look at the affidavit of the presiding officer, he's produced a similar Form 34A. It says it gives the same outcome. The next slide. The UDA agent, same 244 and 114. Then you have the next slide, the Azimio agent, again, 224, 114. The next slide is the affidavit of their own agent. He says what is in Mr. Odinga's affidavit is not what I submitted to the party. They decide, we're not going to respond to that. But we expect the court somehow to determine that there were fraudulent Form 34As. Is this right? Let's go to the next slide. What is in Mr. Odinga's affidavit? Look at the last column. It says, for Raila Amolo Odinga, 244 votes. For Mr. William Samoei Ruto, 38. What happened to the other votes? Something is fundamentally wrong. And this is just one document. We have filed other affidavits which illustrate what happened here. Let's look at the next slide. The law requires the Iebc to deliver certain forms. I'd invite the court to look at the form for this particular location, this particular polling station, and see whether what has been set out in Mr. Odinga's affidavit is correct. Let's go to the last slide. What then are we telling you? The numbers between the Iebc portal, the Iebc presiding officer, the UDA agent, the Azimio agent, and the Form 34A from Bomas are all aligned. Question we must ask is, where did the form that is presented by Mr. Odinga come from? Arnold Odinga, so that we do not mix up names. I think this must be what the late Issa Juma of Supawanyika had in mind when he penned the words, sisi twajua anafanya biashara, lakini biashara anajua mwenyewe. Only Mr. Odinga can tell us where this came from. And the other 40, they are not part of what was actually the product of the people expressing their will. So, in a nutshell, even without trying to demonstrate to you how the other irregularities and alleged infringements of the law have not affected the law, the petitioners fall far short of what is expected. But let me look at one or two things, because one of the things that has really featured a lot, and I'm going to try and avoid rehashing what has been said by the other lawyers, is that the commissioners have a significant role. That what 138(3)(c) means is that the commissioners, the 7 men and women, have to be involved in the exercise that is to be undertaken. With respect, this submission is skewed by a failure to interpret the Constitution correctly. I think it's long been settled that the Constitution, the interpretation of the Constitution, looks both at the text and the context. And what has happened here is that the petitioners have decided we will stick with the text. And even that they stretch. They say the Iebc, the commission, means there's 7 of them. With respect, that's an invitation to the Supreme Court to, through the back door, overturn what Maina Kiai said, which is that you start at the lowest level and cascade things, but it is not the job of 7 men and women. Let's look at the 7 commissioners a little more, and in particular the 4 who it is said should lead to the conclusion that the election was not conducted in accordance with the Constitution. They were on board with every other commissioner. They spoke with one voice until about 3 p.m. on the 15th of August. Then they had their Damascus moment and made it to Serena. They changed their position. If you look at the affidavit of Samuel Gidai, look at the clips of the 4 commissioners announcing the results. But you were told here yesterday they were being given pieces of paper to read out numbers. Is this believable? But we were told by another speaker, another advocate, that these men and women were vetted by the National Assembly. They are therefore very serious citizens who correctly undertake a very important function, the running of elections. But they say they did not participate in this. In determining who to believe, look at the context. Look at the whole series of events from when the nomination took place, when the ballot papers were printed, including the supervision that they undertook, and determine whether these 4 commissioners are to be believed. Mr. Njenga, for I think the 7th respondent, argues they are here not to support either side, but to discharge their duty under the Constitution. But they did file a response. They started off by filing affidavits to set out the evidence. There's no property in a witness. They didn't stop there. On the 26th of August, they decided we will appoint another lawyer on behalf of the Iebc who is in effect going to admit the alleged infringements. This is where you apply the duck test. If it looks like a duck, if it swims like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. They are saying we are here to show you we are independent. Are they? With respect, their conduct demonstrates otherwise. In a word, it is my humble submission that the petitioners have not demonstrated there were any irregularities or illegalities. Forget the magnitude. They really haven't demonstrated any. I'd urge you to dismiss these petitions. Ordinarily in these sort of cases, and I'm not telling you what to do one way or the other, because of the nature of the matters, the parties are asked to bear their own costs. But again, what happens in 5 years if people can come in 8 petitions, 1 was struck out, and say whatever they wish to say without offering evidence? I think there was some advocate who said yesterday, we're going to have 200 petitions in 5 years. Why? Because nothing, there are no consequences. We can all come here and be on television, there are no consequences. So what are we asking of you? We are asking you to give us back our country. Determine that there were no infringements, that we had a proper election. We have been in election mode for so long. The only thing that creates wealth is actually working. And this is not work. With respect, the tens of thousands men and women who preside over elections are teachers and farmers and artisans and you name it. We're being asked to make them come back to work in a few months, or in 60 days to be precise. There is no justification for that. The order that should commend itself to you is to dismiss these petitions because they fall far short of what is required. Those are my submissions. Mr. Kyoko Kilukumi will now address you on the 9th issue.
Your Ladyship, the Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court, my name is Kyoko Kilukumi, and I appear for the first respondent. Our team leader has asked me to deal with the issue raised by Mr. George Oraro, Senior Counsel, in regard to the affidavits filed by Joseph Kinyua and Kennedy Kiara. This court did direct that this first respondent is at liberty to come and place the facts he has before this court, not through affidavits, but we've been given the permission to place the facts because time was running and the court directed we have that time. The first respondent wishes to place it on record that under Article 240 of the Kenya Constitution, there is established a National Security Council. And he is, by virtue of being the substantive deputy president, is entitled to sit in that council. He says, in the last 5 years, the council has not sat and discussed anything to do with elections. He further says that matters of election are vested in an independent body, and that independent body is the Iebc. That is the body that has the constitutional mandate to deal with elections. He further says, during that period of 5 years, the council has not asked the National Security Advisory Committee to deal with Iebc on any matter relating to elections. And he takes the position that the visit by members of the National Security Advisory Committee to Iebc at the Tallying Center was an interference with the functions of Iebc. And it was calculated, given the membership who was sent there, it was designed and calculated to intimidate the chair of the Iebc and to seek to influence the outcome of the election. We ask the court to note that these affidavits were provoked by what Mr. Chebukati said in his affidavit sworn on the 26th of August, 2022. From paragraphs 55 to paragraph 75, he has given a subheading and he calls it an attempt to subvert the will of the people. And we invite the court to consider those paragraphs and to see which party is telling you the truth. We wish to refer you specifically to paragraph 66 in that affidavit. And it is an important averment, an important deposition in that affidavit. He says, Mr. Chebukati, when he was at the National Tallying Center, members of the National Security Advisory Committee visited him, and he sat with them after 2 p.m. It is important to contextualize the time. We are talking of the 15th of August, Bomas of Kenya. There is a meeting, and this meeting is attended by all the commissioners. All the 7 commissioners are there. The fact of that meeting is not disputed, or the affidavits filed regarding that matter make critical admissions. The first admission is that indeed Joseph Kinyua telephoned Chebukati and told him, I'm sending my members to you. That's an admission. The second admission is that all the commissioners, and these are the affidavits from Mr. Joseph Kinyua and Mr. Kenneth Kiara, all the commissioners were present.
It is past 2 p.m. It doesn't say how long this meeting took. The country had been put on notice. Elections results will be declared at 3 p.m. And once you look at the paragraph I've referred the court to, Mr. Chebukati says the message from this powerful committee was simple. Declare these elections in favor of the petitioner, the first petitioner, in petition number 5. If you are not able to do so, please massage the electoral data and force a runoff. And now that issue was discussed openly by the members of this powerful committee and all the commissioners in IEBC. The 4 commissioners made it very clear the suggestion from the Security Committee is reasonable and we should actually accommodate it. We should think of doing it. The 3 commissioners, and all of them have sworn affidavit attesting to that. The 3 commissioners said, nothing doing. We will declare these elections in accordance with the Constitution of Kenya, and we will declare the legitimate results. And so we ask the court, you do not have the advantage of witnesses being cross-examined, but you have the ability to look at all the accounts and see which account is more probable. The meeting starts past 2. Elections were to be declared at 3. At 4 p.m., the 4 commissioners are in the Serena Hotel. Our TV screens has been split. One side says 4 commissioners are disowning the results. The other screen is showing us chaos in Bomas, attack on the chair of IEBC, attack on the 2 other commissioners. Do you believe, will this court believe, that members of the National Security Advisory Committee was going to discuss matters of security when in less than 1 hour, 2 hours, the electoral commissioners are being assaulted, and this is being broadcast live. Assaulted, a cognizable offense. Police are in Bomas of Kenya. Nobody's arrested, and the people who are doing these attacks are well known. So we ask you to consider that fact in trying to see which account is likely to be true. The commissioners at Serena Hotel opened by saying, we've conducted a very good election. It's only gone bad towards the end. You will ask yourselves, does somebody disown results which he doesn't know? Do you believe these commissioners did not know what the outcome has been? We submit they knew the result, and that is why they were disowning it. We also ask the court to consider these 4 commissioners, apart from the press they did on 15th of September, they again did it on 16th, the following day, 16th of August. Was it a coincidence that again our TV screens were split into 2? You see the 4 commissioners, and you see the first petitioner, and they are speaking, the language they are talking, the words they are using are strikingly similar. Is it a coincidence? These are matters we invite the court to consider in trying to ask itself, which account do we believe? I urge this court to believe the account given by the 3 commissioners. The will of the people was just about to be subverted. And the attempt was unsuccessful because the three commissioners stood by their oath of office and faithfully executed what was expected of them by the Constitution of Kenya. This split between the commission, the court has asked posed questions. When did it happen? Once you look at the affidavit of Chebukati and the timing, at 2:00, they are in a meeting. And by 4:00, they are in Serena Hotel. You will come to the inescapable conclusion that the division in Iebc was caused by the National Security and Advisory Committee. And indeed, they hijacked the 4. That is why the 4 would approach this court for the very first time in the history of this country, approach the court to seek nullification of an election that they superintended and that they said they conducted a very good election. We ask the court to take into account that there appears to have been a mistaken impression that presidential elections are determined by commissioners. Anybody who wants to become the president of Kenya must have in his corner the Kenyan electorate. And that voter who turns up in the polling station, not the one who stays away. And if you convince that voter who turns out and you get the majority of votes, you become the president. 7 commissioners cannot make you the president. 4 commissioners cannot make you the president. Who makes the decision as to who becomes the president of the Republic of Kenya? It is our humble submission. It is not the commission. It is not any of the commissioners. It is the electorate. It is the people of Kenya. And therefore, this narrative that we are the majority, we needed to sit down and make a decision, that decision as to who becomes the president of Kenya does not lie with the commission. Theirs is to midwife the process, and that is all they can do. We wish to submit that the first respondent won these elections fair and square. You've had the submissions and the evidence that has been presented by the midwife, Iebc. And they have made it absolutely clear that this election was conducted in accordance with the Constitution. It was computed in accordance with the Constitution. And they have a very clear winner as to who obtained the highest number of votes and made all the requirements required by Article 138(4). For that reason, we ask this court to consider that this petition is the consolidated petition are founded, they are all anchored on fiction. They are all anchored in forgeries. They are anchored in fraud. That clearly tells you these petitions are built on sinking sand, and for that reason, they must fail. I wish to ask the court amply to reflect on the ruling of King Solomon. Just like King Solomon before you, you have 2 gentlemen here, each one claiming a baby. The baby they are claiming is the outcome of the 2022 election petition. During the days of Solomon, there was no DNA, and therefore he could not easily make up a decision as to whose baby is this. Today, you don't have mothers competing for this baby.
you have two gentlemen, each one of them claiming the baby. What does the petitioner ask you to do? Just like the days of Solomon is telling you, give me the baby is mine. And then he goes on to tell you, if you cannot give me the baby, slice it into two. We can call this baby Victoria. We can call this baby Victor. But the more gender neutral term, let's call this baby Victory. Baby Victory has a clear DNA. Baby Victory, his DNA is captured in the original Forms 34A. His DNA is captured also in Forms 34B. That baby belongs to Honorable William Samoei Ruto. Give him his baby. Don't divide the baby. The petitioner here is telling you, you either give me the baby or cut the baby into two. Nullify the election. Solomon used that in this year to know who was the true mother of this child, because no mother would want her baby chopped into two. And so by the petitioner coming to tell you here, if you don't give me the baby, slice the baby into two, you already know whose baby the victory of 2022 presidential election is. I urge the court to give the baby to the legitimate and lawful father, who is Honorable William Samoei Ruto. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Your Ladyship, the Chief Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court, I wanted to yield the floor to my senior friend, Gatia, Senior Counsel. Thank you.
Madam Chief Justice, my duty is to make closing submissions as I also deal with the last issue. What are the appropriate reliefs? Yes. Oh. I start by apologizing. I left out two members of my team, two lawyers who have worked very hard, Rose Thiongo and Ham Langat, Mr. Ham Langat. I think in fairness, it's good I place them on record. They have done a sterling performance, and this is part of the mentorship we should do. Madam Chief Justice, let me also start by apologizing that I did not place on record the fact that we did file written submissions on 27th August this year, and we rely on those written submissions. We took lots of time to actually develop almost a treatise on the origin of Election Act. We went to 1870 in England, where we found the first codification of the Election Act, and the subsequent development and the hesitation by apex courts in not disturbing electoral victory. I would request you, in the fullness of time, please look at it. I should also, in fairness, indicate that the authority I referred to from Ghana decided last year the Mahana decision is authority number 5 in our list of authorities. And again, this, Madam Chief Justice, let me say this because I ought to acknowledge it. Judges in Ghana quoted with approval one of your judges. Writing of this apex court are now being quoted with approval in the continent of Africa. And if I could say so, this is also because of the very vibrant advocacy by Malanet friends. So if we could participate in enriching the jurisprudence in Kenya and Africa, so be it. I now go to a very brief response overview. You have a petition before you by Julia, I think is now number 7, the one about special group of people, 500,000, who allegedly were denied the right to vote. And this is what we call not now fiction, but theory, pleading or drafting a petition on the basis of abstract principles. The so-called 500 people, not a single one of them have filed an affidavit to say because they were working for Iebc or were working in any hospital, they were deprived an opportunity to vote. In other words, this court must also try to establish some rules of engagement. Are we going to be holding this country at ransom as we process these petitions, which are, to say in very modest terms, very frivolous? One comes and says 500 people are denied an opportunity to vote, and then he gets away with it. Julia is a very good example of what states in America have now resolved to do. They do punish a pleader who files a pleading with the full knowledge that what is being pleaded is incorrect. I go to another area of so-called suppression of votes. This is another constant denominator, that is suppression of vote, because one level of votes was not held. And the question is, where is the empirical evidence? Empirical evidence that because there is no voting for a senator, then the turnout for votes for the presidency are suppressed, and suppressed in relation to only one candidate, not both candidates. My learned friends have talked about what yesterday was being called dysfunctional Iebc. It is not dysfunctional Iebc. It was a functional Iebc until 3 p.m. on 15th. On 15th August, towards 3 p.m., some commissioners were hijacked with their free will, and they opted to walk out from their brothers and sisters. There is a point that concerns me as a regular practitioner in this court, in these electoral cycles. And this is this. For how long are we going to allow our political class to advance self-interest, and to hold this country in perpetuity of uncertainty? That is something I think, Madam CJ, you now have an opportunity under Section 3 of your Act. The first fundamental in Section 3 is your true north, is supremacy of the Constitution. Your true north being the supremacy of the Constitution, and then other factor to consider is that this court is required to help us develop even a political path for this country. Those two become very important aids in how we deal with the political class. I'll come to that towards the end. But it is something of concern, because unless it is captured early, I do not see great hope in the way we are proceeding. Madam CJ, first and second respondents are very ordinary Kenyans, very ordinary. Humble origin, And this is a country I always have thought is a country of hope and opportunity. Hope and opportunity for each and every Kenyan. A child from humble origin ought to aspire one day to be a Chief Justice of this country. A child of very humble origin ought to aspire to be a top surgeon in this country. I say all this because, in all fairness, unless we show hope and opportunity to all, then we'll be missing an important aspect of our growth. There were questions that were posed to my learned friends. Since I won't have another opportunity, allow me just a few minutes to deal with a few of them. I'll start with the first question about rejected votes. It was posed by one of the judges. Rejected votes is a point we litigated in Raila 1, that is 2013, not as a side issue, but it was the subject of a petition. In 2013, there was a petition dealing with nothing but rejected votes. Rejected votes, Madam CJ, can be the third candidate. It's very easy for rejected votes to be the third candidate. And in 2013 at Bomas, where I had the pleasure and privilege of being the chief agent for the candidate, it became quite obvious that rejected candidates will be the third candidate in that contest. And if they were to be factored, then the whole purpose of rejected votes is to bring down the victory of the candidate who would otherwise have won. So it is a point we litigated at length. Some of my learned friends, my seniors, we litigated at length, and this court held and found that what is to be considered are the valid votes cast. So in my submission, that is a point that has been dealt with. It was again repeated by the court in Ghana. Last year, they rejected the notion of considering rejected votes in the final tally. As a matter of fact, now that I remember, I'm getting a little older, I was clearer then in 2013, it is a misconception to call them rejected votes. It is actually rejected ballot, because a vote is that which is valid, which expresses a choice. So those so-called rejected votes are actually rejected ballot papers. The same holds true for spoiled ballots, and the same holds true for stray ballots. As fate would have it, you will not even know about the stray ballots at the point that the tallying is going on. I associate myself with the submissions made by my learned friends, Iebc. They are the ones who conducted the election. It is not within our place to supplement their submissions. We wish to associate ourselves with the submissions, particularly as regards how the election was conducted. I come to what is the elephant in the room, to quote Tata, who I have never quoted before. What is the way forward? On the one hand, you are being requested by many of my learned friends, actually all of them in unison. Is the first time I have seen so many lawyers making the same request: nullification of the election. Almost reminds me of the trial of Christ. Crucify him. Nullify the election. After nullification of the election, no solution is provided. But all they request is nullify the election. As you consider the rival position, I will request you to consider the following. In the event you nullify the election, you will effectively be rejecting the substantive truth that the majority of voters in this country express their free choice. While considering that plea of nullify the election, we shall be acceding to a very dangerous trend in this country, that presidential elections are to be held, and if I'm aggrieved, not because of any error, but I want to hold the country at ransom, I will walk to the Supreme Court and the election will be nullified. While considering that request, please also consider the far-reaching consequences that we all participated, we all experienced in 2017. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, the first and second respondent come to you with a request. The request is, voters did exercise their right. Hold them to that covenant. The covenant is they made a choice. Do allow the country to now move forward. We cannot and cannot afford election mode in perpetuity. I think I have said enough to demonstrate where my mind is. It is time for finality and stability. Finality and stability. In doing so, Madam Chief Justice, you'll be sending yet another signal to the political class. And here I am not finger-pointing anybody. As I said in 2013, what I say for this client is what I'll say for the next client who is in that class. The country does not belong to them. This country belongs to all of us. And since the country belongs to all of us, no person should consider that there is an entitlement. Considering that there is an entitlement is to engage in an illusion. That illusion ought to be replaced by reality. Reality is that it is voters who make their choice. And once voters have made their choice, let us inculcate a culture that my brothers and sisters on this side are now used to. We walk to our court, we may think the law is on our side, we may think we are entitled to victory, but we accept the verdict of the court because much as we may think we are eloquent litigators, the final word is always with the court. With those comments, may I very humbly and respectfully request this court to let this cycle come to an end so that we can get back to our business, the business of developing our country. With those remarks, I would wish to close and to donate the 30 minutes to the court because we are patriotic enough to know that it's not really in the interest of this country to engage this never-ending circle of litigation. Thank you very much. Unless you have any questions for us, that's the end of our case.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the donation and the appreciation that this time that we have is very, very tight, because for us, the work actually begins when we finish all this. The bench will have questions to those submissions that have been made today, but I think there are a few who might also want to add some questions to the petitioners, especially the commissioners who are supporting the petition. I think what we want to do now is take a short health break, resume at 5:20, and this is going to be the order of business. We will ask questions to the petitioners and the commissioners who are supporting the petition. They will still respond tomorrow when they are doing their responses. But for the respondents, the first and the other respondents, we will request them to answer today the questions. We will also share the report on the scrutiny and the orders that were issued by this court on the discovery issues, the application by the petitioners. I think it was the first petitioner, Kerif Karifa, and the youth advocacy. They had applications for scrutiny. That report is being finalized. It will be shared. And tomorrow we will give you an opportunity to respond to the report. So we will adjourn for just 20 minutes.